Hi everyone, guess what we're going to talk about today? One of my favorite books is called Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, written by Dr. Kate Rheaume-Bleue. Dr. Kate and I have already talked about this topic, and her video on Cheese Hangouts was the highest viewed. In other words, it had more views than any of the interviews that I've done so far, and that tells me a lot. But before we start, I would like to ask you a question that's not specifically cheese related, although it is somewhat related to cheese. Are you still on the fence when it comes to saturated fat and foods that are high in cholesterol? Well, if you are, please take a look at this book, read it, devour it, and love it, because it says the big fat surprise why butter, meat, and cheese belong in a healthy diet, written by Nina Teicholz. Took her 9 years to research and actually write this book. And it's a very important book too. So let's see what Dr. Kate has in mind when she talks about K2. I'm really excited about having Dr. Kate in today, and I want to start with one question related to the supplementation of calcium and vitamin D. For many years we were told to supplement our diet with those two, and now it seems they've changed their mind, and it just strikes me as kind of interesting because it's kind of complicated. So in your book you wrote, vitamin K2 is the key to putting calcium back in its place to remedy this problem. So what's going on?
Well, you're right. We've been told to take so much calcium, and actually calcium is not that difficult to get into our diets, quite easy. And we don't generally have to be concerned about its intake. If we're lacking calcium in our bones, it's not calcium's fault, and it's generally not because we don't have enough calcium in our diets. The body actually maintains fairly high levels of calcium most of the time, but the trick is to make sure that that calcium stays where it should. And there is a system to deal with that, system of proteins that will put calcium into our bones and make sure it doesn't build up where it shouldn't. But that system relies in large part, almost exclusively, in fact, on vitamin K2. So when the K2 is lacking, the calcium is being leached from our bones and it's building up in arteries and other places, so it really becomes a problem. It can even be deadly.
All right. So now let's go to question 2. I'm personally concerned about the health of our children, usually in the areas of obesity and diabetes. I actually wrote a book about children's health and talking about preventing childhood obesity. But now, after reading chapter 5 in your book, I have a new concern. And that is the proper growth of children's bones. And you write, up to 90% of maximum lifetime bone strength and density is acquired by age 18 in girls and age 20 in boys. And since most of us are deficient in vitamin K2, I assume that children are too. So how big of a problem is this?
It is a big problem. I was really surprised the amount of research that I came across about children and vitamin K2, because normally kids, they're one of the last groups to be studied for almost any health condition. But given the big role that this plays in skeletal health and the growth of the bones, there was actually quite a bit of research, quite a few studies. And you're right that it's true. We gain our lifetime maximum bone density by age roughly 18 or 20. And in fact, studies have shown that yes, vitamin K2 deficiency, like we've heard with vitamin D, K2 deficiency is widespread, but there are certain populations, and in fact, adolescents are one of the highest risk groups and have the highest levels of K2 deficiency. Once the hormones kick in around puberty, the skeleton starts to grow very quickly, and that requires lots of vitamin K2 to keep the bones growing. And if that's lacking, then we can miss out on important chances to build that bone density. So that can really make a difference in those periods. As well, studies have shown school-age kids age 6 to 11 benefit from even just a little bit of vitamin K2. The amount that you might get in a piece or two of high K2 cheese, for example, can make a difference in bone health and appropriate bone growth.
Well, what about supplements for children? Do you recommend that?
I do recommend supplements for kids if they're not eating the few cheeses that we know of as being really high, or some of the foods that we know of being high in K2. Then I do recommend, because of this research around the bone health, and it's such an important basic thing. And we know kids need vitamin D, and K and D absolutely work together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about cheese. You mentioned 3 cheeses that are very high in vitamin K2 in your book: Dutch Gouda, French style Brie, and cheddar. And one of the things I found really interesting is that you say that the bacterial fermentation augments the K2 content in cheese. Mm. How does that work?
Well, as you know, fermentation, bacterial fermentation of any food, and milk in particular, it's almost like alchemy. You are taking a food and radically transforming it. And depending on the bacteria doing the work, you can create very different products. Mm-hmm. And some bacteria, not all, but certain ones, in their fermentation of the milk, happen to produce vitamin K2, just as a side benefit of what they're doing. And so that's why some, but not all, fermented foods, and certain cheeses in particular, are very high in vitamin K2.
Okay. So the last question is, when you wrote this book, I think in 2012, there are many new researches that have come out since then. Is there anything that just kind of pops up that that came up recently that you're interested in?
Well, K2 research is in its early days, and I'm happy to see more studies supporting the things that I wrote about in the book and providing more evidence for some of those health benefits. Fortunately, nothing has particularly contradicted what I wrote there, but also, there's new research on new avenues and areas where we see benefits, like kidney health. I touched a little bit on that, but as well, very recently, I've been contacted by a number of people who have benefits with psoriasis, which is something I hadn't written about. Mm-hmm. And those are the big ones, probably areas where we see even more or greater benefits than we thought.
Well, in your book, you list several conditions that are associated with the deficiency of K2, and it's on, I think, page 20, and I've already done some promos about that. But it just amazes me that as much as I read and as much as I watch YouTube videos and study, and I'm trying to get all the new information about in nutrition, it's very difficult. But how is it that I've missed it, K2, all of these years? I mean, it's kind of baffling.
I thought so too. I was amazed when I first came across this research and how much there was about cancer and children's health, heart health, bone health. And I thought, how come nobody's talking about this? And I was convinced somebody eventually would start, and nobody did. And so that's why I wrote the book. But even then, it's been out for a few years now, and it's still not, your audiences will be still amongst the first to hear about this.
Well, good deal. I want to just close with one comment about two actually, on the book, and you'll see this on the screen. You'll see the title of the book, and you'll also see several cheeses stacked on top of each other, which I love. So we know it's a cheese-friendly book. That's awesome. But the most important thing in this book is it's the subtitle: How a Little-Known Vitamin Could Save Your Life. And after reading your book, Dr. Kate, I am convinced that you are right.
It's not hyperbole. Actually, I've heard from individuals who have had improvements in their arterial calcification, heart valve calcification, in particular aortic stenosis, that would suggest that K2 is truly life-saving.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to do some webinars just by myself, and if you'd like to jump in at some point, go for it. But I'm going to cover diabetes, osteoporosis, and heart disease, those 3. And I'm just going to follow your book. The book is just a great source, and I trust it. I trust you. And thank you so much for joining us today on Cheese Hangouts.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me and for spreading the word about vitamin K2.
As we say in the cheese world, spreading the curd.